Most honored guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It is my pleasure and my privilege to welcome all of you to the EEB Annual Conference. We are delighted that so many of you from all across Europe have followed our invitation to participate and share in this unique event, including participants from Ukraine, Cyprus, or Scotland, to name a few. Distinguished guests, today's conference would not have been possible without the support of the Austrian Federal Minister for the Environment. I would like to welcome André Ruprechter. Thank you very much for joining us today. Welcome, André Ruprechter. Thank you. This year's conference is unique in a number of ways. First, it is the outcome of a first-time cooperation between two umbrella organizations for environmental NGOs in Europe, the Brussels-based EEB and the Vienna-based Umweltdachverband. 200 NGOs are represented by these two organizations, and with so many of them present today. This conference is a truly exceptional opportunity to engage with the richness and diversity of environmental NGOs in Europe and to intensify their cooperation. Therefore, a very warm welcome to the EEB board and staff, especially to our President, EEB President Mikael Karlsson, and Secretary General Jeremy Waits. Thank you for coming. Thank you for making this possible and for the confidence and trust that you put in our collaboration. It's important to have a partner organization that represents our interest at the European level. And let me take this opportunity to underline the importance of European environmental policies. It is precisely in the environmental sector where the need for a higher level of governance is most evident. A supranational level of governance that is more committed to the principles of objectivity and less to national sensitivities and the influence of local interest groups. EU environmental policies have raised environmental standards across Europe. This is no question. Progress in environmental policies to a large extent depends on the activities of environmental NGOs, which leads me to another unique feature of this conference today. Our exhibition in the catering area. Many EEB member organizations have followed our invitation to exhibit their expertise and activities with a poster of their organization. Please have a look at the posters during the breaks to discover the diversity of NGOs represented today. Today's conference brings together experts and representatives from institutions, national authorities, and society. In other words, a wide range of important stakeholders in European and national environmental policies. The event is not only an opportunity to learn from each other, but also to network and intensify the cooperation of stakeholders in the environmental sector. So please make use of today's networking opportunities, including our evening reception that will entertain you with local food and local music from the Sugar Daisies Hot Club. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm proud to say that today's meeting has been successfully certified as a green meeting. And just before we get started, I would like to say thank you very much to all of you who helped us make this event come together. Mrs. Emma Ernst and Mr. Abraham Lombrana from the EEB, Mrs. Julika Dietrich and Mrs. Daniela Werdel from the Umweltdachverband, and all the other helping hands for all the uncounted hours of work preparing this day in Vienna. We couldn't have done it without you. And before I hand things over to our president, Mike Karlsson, I want to say once more, and on behalf of the Umweltdachverband, welcome. It's a pleasure to see so many of you here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this nice introduction. Dear Minister, dear Austrian hosts, dear friends, dear EEB members, Europe, this rich and wonderful but also very puzzling continent. Here we live in the shades of a history that has seen the birth of Vivaldi and Cortes, of Marie Curie and Hitler. Our continent is the origin of invaluable technical and societal innovations, from the principles of democracy to smallpox vaccine, but also a continent historically marked by warfare and violations of human rights around the globe. It's a continent that, after decades of struggle with bridging a ruinous East-West divide, is again showing internal tensions and disagreement, again with increasingly uncivilized populistic elements. And a continent on which we all contribute to undermining the resources on which our children's well-being will depend. Europe, my love, why do you always seem to smear your white dress with black stains? What does it take for you to choose a morally responsible pathway for the future than one that we, with technical language, would call a sustainable development from environmental and social perspectives? What does it take for you all here today being present to choose so? Because it's a choice that we are facing. On the one hand, we see unemployment, a striking lack of gender balance, erosion of biodiversity, emissions of greenhouse gases, and unsustainable patterns of production and consumption, all combined today with disintegration, with populism, aversion to migration, non-democratic movements, and straight-out conflicts. On the other hand, we see world leaders embarking on a journey towards global sustainable development goals, and even previous, what I would call science deniers, promoting new and ambitious climate policy targets. We see civil society increasingly engaged all over our European continent. For example, in our growing organization, EEB, the largest environmental organization in Europe. We see polls clearly showing that large majorities in the European public want the EU to do more, not less, on environment. We see cleaner technologies, for instance, renewable energy technologies, rapidly gaining more ground. And we also see an increasing number of companies taking environmental challenges seriously, understanding that public policies rather enhance than jeopardize competitiveness, thereby leaving their branch organizations behind when these try to orient themselves with a rear mirror as compass for the future. But the trust in European institutions continues to go down, and populism is gaining ground. Is it right then, I wonder, to downplay environment and development in policies and speeches, as we have seen even in the recent past weeks? Will that downplaying increase public support for the European Union? Will it strengthen our economy? No, says the public. No, says science. No, says experience. And no, says an increased number of local governments and companies contacting us in the environmental movements with proposals on joint campaigns. Those downplaying sustainable development goals and the circular economy, those closing their eyes for the erosion of biodiversity and the value of biodiversity, those running behind in climate policy development, they will hurt not only public health and ecosystems, but also social and economic values, including jeopardizing competitiveness. Fortunately, the times are changing. We see previous global antagonists such as China and US starting to work together, trying to be forerunners on climate policy. We see multilateralism gaining more ground again, and we need to do the same here in Europe. In peaceful collaboration, based on the fundamental rights that Europe is constituted upon, including the rule of law and policies based on science, we need to focus more on the most pressing problems of our time. And here, science clearly tells us that the European Union, among other key issues, need to address the full environmental crisis. We need to do with air, with water, with soil. We need to do with fisheries, agriculture, and trade policies what the world started to do with climate in Paris. And for those wanting an economic analysis of this, the evidence clearly tells us that stricter policies are very often more profitable than the opposite. The choice then that we all are confronting is between being a loser that overlooks environmental destructions and our too large global footprint, or a winner that works for preserving and rebuilding natural capital for our children. The choice concerns whether or not to transform our European societies. And again, fortunately, we know that transformative change, perhaps surprisingly for many, is a common theme in human societies. The spread and frequency of such transformative change has grown with time. In the recent past, we can identify a range of profound transformations that have shaped modern societies. Take, for instance, the demographic transition with radically enhanced life expectancy, dramatically lowered mortality and birth rates, the emergence and growth of democracy, the rise of welfare societies, the rise of globalization with new patterns of digital communication, the changes brought about by the feminist revolution, and the related acknowledgement of LGBTQ rights. All these changes have happened in less than a century, some even the most recent decades. The mobile phone and the World Wide Web appeared in earnest in the 1980s and are now literally everywhere. So this is good news. And it also contains the message that profound change, it's not only possible, it's actually normal and it can be expected. At the same time, though, we know that transformation rarely happens spontaneously. We need to make it happen together by promoting coherent, comprehensive, and coupled policies, not least in the European institutions, by saying no to populism and by moving as the title for this conference, From Sustainability Talk to Policy Walk. I think it's time for the European Union to develop, adopt, and implement a globally leading strategy for transformational change that puts the interest of people and the planet first. A strategy for sustainable development that fully implements the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development in the European Union. It's up to all of us to promote this. In a way, we are living at the outer edge of time, sitting with the future of Europe in our hands. Out here, where actually no one has ever been before, we continuously have the opportunity to make new choices, to seek and embark on new pathways. For me, and for the European Environmental Bureau, the choice is obvious. We want the EU to rise to the challenges. We want to see a Europe that blooms and prospers as a continent marked by solidarity. Solidarity with fellow beings, solidarity with future generations, and solidarity with the environment upon which everything else is dependent. We invite all of you to join us during this conference and in the coming decades. Thank you very much.